The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the penthouse apartment, each drop a tiny insistent drumbeat against the hum of the city. Amelia traced a finger across the condensation, her reflection shimmering back at her, a ghost in a silk robe. Below, the relentless rhythm of Manhattan pulsed, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing within her. She picked up her phone, the screen illuminating her drawn face. A new email, marked urgent. Her heart gave a familiar, uncomfortable lurch. It was from Mark. She clicked it open, her breath catching in her throat as she read the subject line. "This is the most important video of my life." Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped to play. The grainy footage flickered to life, a younger Mark, vibrant and brimming with an almost reckless joy, standing against a backdrop of azure sea and whitewashed walls. He was smiling, a genuine, unrestrained smile that she hadn't seen in years. And then, the camera panned, slowly, deliberately, to reveal her, a younger Amelia, laughing, her hair wild in the sea breeze, completely unaware of the lens, completely unaware of the future. The sight of herself, so carefree, so utterly in love, was a physical blow. The video was shot on their honeymoon, a forgotten relic from a time when their world had felt infinite and unbreakable. Her own voice, clear and melodic, floated from the phone's speaker, a distant echo of a happiness she barely recognized. Mark's commentary, a whispered narration over the ambient sounds of distant gulls and gentle waves, began. "Remember this, Amy? Our first morning in Santorini. You said it felt like we'd stepped into a postcard. I remember thinking you were the postcard, all sunshine and laughter." His voice, though older, still held that familiar timbre that could both soothe and wound her. He spoke of shared dreams, of promises etched against sunsets, of a future they had meticulously planned, brick by joyful brick. He recounted inside jokes, moments of tender vulnerability, and the sheer, unadulterated bliss of those early days. As the video continued, a montage of their honeymoon unfolded. Stolen kisses under ancient olive trees, hands clasped tightly as they navigated cobbled streets, his playful attempts to teach her rudimentary Greek, her infectious giggles echoing through the sun-drenched alleys. Each frame was a poignant reminder of a love so potent, so deeply ingrained in their very being, that its present absence felt like a gaping wound. The footage ended abruptly, fading to black, leaving only the soft hum of the phone and the deafening silence of her apartment. Amelia sat motionless, the phone still clutched in her hand, the screen now dark. The memories, long dormant, surged forth with a visceral force, threatening to drown her. It wasn't just the nostalgia, potent as it was. It was the stark contrast between the vibrant, hopeful couple on screen and the fractured individuals they had become. She felt a profound ache, a complex tapestry of longing, regret, and a confusing flicker of something akin to hope. Why now? Why this video? Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her bedside table, a more recent, yet still distant image of them, taken before the unraveling began. Their smiles in that photo were polite, a practiced performance for the camera, utterly devoid of the unrestrained joy that had spilled so effortlessly from their younger selves in the video. The weight of their shared history, resurrected by a digital ghost, pressed down on her, demanding an answer that she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence, a stark counterpoint to the whirlwind of emotions churning within Amelia. She slowly lowered the phone, placing it gently on the polished wood of her nightstand, as if it were a fragile artifact. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, traced the cool glass of the framed photograph. In it, Mark's arm was around her, a faint, almost imperceptible distance between their bodies, a chasm that had widened exponentially over the past year. She remembered the day that photo was taken, a mutual friend's wedding, a forced show of unity they'd both played along with, even as the unspoken tensions coiled tighter between them. The video, however, had been different. It wasn't a performance. It was raw, unfiltered joy, a testament to a love so pure and encompassing that it felt almost foreign to her now. Each shared glance, every inside joke whispered into the Santorini breeze, had been a dagger to her carefully constructed wall of indifference. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, she was back there. The scent of bougainvillea and salt air filling her senses, the warmth of Mark's hand in hers as they navigated the winding cobblestone streets. His laughter, bright and unburdened, echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the strange silences that had come to define their later years. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek, a hot rivulet against her cool skin. It wasn't just for what they had lost, but for the shattering realization of how deeply she had buried those memories, how meticulously she had pruned away the vibrant branches of their shared past, leaving only the withered, thorny remnants of their present. The question that lingered, persistent and unsettling, was not just why now, but what does he want? The urgency in his email, the profound personal nature of the video, it all pointed to something more than a mere nostalgic glance backward. It felt like a desperate plea, a last-ditch effort to bridge a chasm that she had believed was impassable. Amelia pressed her fingertips to her temples, a dull ache throbbing behind her eyes. The laptop screen, still displaying the frozen image of their younger selves, seemed to mock her with its vibrant glow. She closed the lid, plunging the room into a sudden, oppressive dimness. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, laden with unspoken words and unaddressed grievances. She rose from the armchair, her movements stiff, as if the weight of memory had settled into her very bones. She walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds against the inky canvas of the night sky, indifferent to her turmoil. She remembered another night, long ago, in a small villa overlooking the caldera, where the stars had seemed close enough to touch, and Mark had whispered promises into her hair, promises of forever, of a life entwined. Those promises, once so tangible, now felt like echoes from a forgotten dream. What did he want? The question gnawed at her, a relentless parasite. Was it reconciliation? A final, definitive end? Or simply an explanation? A chance to articulate the unspeakable chasms that had grown between them? She thought of the arguments that had become increasingly frequent, the quiet resentments that had festered, the slow, agonizing erosion of trust and intimacy. She had built walls around herself, brick by painful brick, until their shared life had become a fortress of solitude. And now he was attempting to breach those walls with a weapon forged from their most cherished memories. The audacity, the sheer vulnerability of it, both enraged and disarmed her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a tremor running through her as she considered her response. The blank screen of the reply email seemed to mock her, a vast expanse waiting to be filled with words that felt impossibly heavy. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow, or worse, accusatory? Every potential phrase felt inadequate, incapable of bridging the chasm he had so expertly illuminated with their past. She pictured him, wherever he was, perhaps checking his phone every few minutes, anticipating her reaction. The thought of his expectant gaze, even imagined, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. She closed her eyes, trying to clear her mind, but the images from the video replayed themselves in vivid detail. The carefree laughter, the way his hand had instinctively found hers, the shared glances that spoke volumes without a single word. It was a cruel trick, this resurgence of dormant feelings, a reminder of a love so potent it had once felt invincible. Now it was brittle, fractured, a mosaic of shattered dreams. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through the faint remnants of her morning makeup. She felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the emotional weight of their shared history. He had opened a wound she had believed was scarred over, and the raw pain of it was breathtaking. The tear was followed by another, then a silent cascade, each drop a testament to the years they had built and then meticulously dismantled. She didn't bother to wipe them away. There was no point in holding back the tide now. The video had acted as a powerful current, dragging her back to the shore of their beginning, where everything had been vibrant and full of promise. She remembered the scent of the bougainvillea in Santorini, the taste of the warm feta, the way the Aegean Sea had shimmered like scattered diamonds under the relentless sun. Those memories, once treasured keepsakes, now felt like shards of glass embedded in her heart. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the reply button. What could she possibly say? Thank you for the painful reminder. I miss that version of us, too. The words felt inadequate, hollow, incapable of conveying the maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. She scrolled through her contacts, finding his name, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. Mark. Just his name, stark and unadorned. She could call him. She could demand to know why he had sent it now, after all this time, after the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart had finally begun to solidify. But what good would it do? Would it change anything? Or would it simply reignite a conversation that had already burned itself to ash? She laid the phone down, face first, as if to silence its potential call. The silence of her apartment pressed in on her, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She walked to the window, gazing out at the familiar cityscape, a stark contrast to the whitewashed villages and azure waters of the video. The world outside continued its indifferent rhythm, oblivious to the upheaval within her. She was a ship adrift, caught in a storm she thought she had weathered, and the lighthouse she had once steered by was now merely a distant, flickering memory. Amelia ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of weary resignation. The video had not been a plea exactly, but something far more insidious. A carefully crafted wound, reopening old scars with surgical precision. It was a reminder, not of what they had lost, but of what they once were. A ghost of a love that had been so vibrant, so undeniable. She closed her eyes, and the vibrant colors of Santorini bled into the mundane gray of her living room. She could almost feel the warmth of the Mediterranean sun on her skin, hear the distant chime of goat bells, and the hushed murmur of Mark's voice in her ear, whispering promises she had believed with every fiber of her being. The memories, once carefully compartmentalized and filed away, now surged forth, a tidal wave threatening to drown her. Their first meeting, a clumsy collision in a crowded bookstore, books scattering like autumn leaves. His infectious laugh that could disarm her even on her most cynical days. The way his hand fit perfectly in hers, as if sculpted for that very purpose. These were not mere recollections. They were visceral sensations, sharp and immediate, pulling her back to a time when happiness felt not like a fleeting visitor, but a permanent resident. She remembered the sheer joy of planning their future, painting a shared canvas of dreams with broad, hopeful strokes. Now that canvas was ripped, the colors faded, the promises broken. And she was left to wonder, had it all been an illusion, or had something truly precious simply crumbled under the weight of unspoken words and accumulating resentments? Amelia's fingers, trembling slightly, found the edge of her laptop. She closed the lid with a soft click, plunging the room into a silence far heavier than before. The image of Mark's face, etched with a youthful exuberance she hadn't seen in years, lingered behind her eyelids. It wasn't just the video that had unleashed this torrent of emotion. It was the sheer audacity of it, the calculated vulnerability he had displayed. After all this time, after the carefully constructed walls between them, he had chosen to communicate not with an email of apology or explanation, but with a ghost from their past. She rose from the armchair, her movements stiff, as if her limbs had forgotten how to function independently of the emotional maelstrom within her. The apartment, once a haven of shared warmth, now felt vast and empty, each object a silent witness to their slow undoing. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece caught her eye. Their wedding day, a moment frozen in gold and white. Mark's arm a protective band around her waist, their smiles wide and unburdened. They had looked so gloriously, irrevocably happy. What had happened to that couple? Where had the laughter gone, the easy intimacy, the shared silences that had once spoken volumes? The question, raw and insistent, began to claw at her throat. Amelia reached for the photograph, her fingers tracing the outline of Mark's face, then her own. The glass felt cold beneath her touch, a stark contrast to the warmth she remembered from that day. It wasn't just a question of what had happened, but how. How did two people so utterly entwined, so convinced of their forever, drift so far apart that the only way to bridge the chasm was through a spectral recording of their former selves? The video was not an olive branch. It was a mirror reflecting what they had lost, shattering the illusion that their separation was a clean break, a simple severing. It was a wound reopened, bleeding memories she had meticulously, painstakingly bandaged. She turned away from the mantelpiece, walking towards the window overlooking the city, its myriad lights blurring into a shimmering tapestry. Each light represented a life, a story, perhaps even a love like theirs that had foundered on unseen shoals. The thought offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of isolation. She hugged herself, a futile attempt to contain the tremor that had begun deep within her, spreading outwards. The flicker of hope the video had ignited was now a raging inferno, threatening to consume the carefully constructed indifference she had worn like armor. She had convinced herself she was moving on, that the pain was a dull ache, manageable. Mark's video had proven her a liar. The city lights pulsed below, indifferent to her burgeoning turmoil. Amelia's fingers traced the cold glass of the window pane, a barrier between her and the indifferent world outside. She closed her eyes, and the vibrant images from the video flooded her mind. Mark's easy laugh, the way his hand had instinctively found hers, the shared glances that spoke volumes without a single word. It was a language they had once known fluently, a dialect of the heart now reduced to forgotten whispers. She remembered the exact moment that video had been filmed. It was their second-to-last day in Santorini, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the whitewashed buildings. They had been high on life, on love, on the sheer impossibility of finding such perfect happiness. Mark had pulled out his phone, a playful glint in his eyes, insisting they capture the moment. "For posterity," he'd said. She had laughed, pressing a kiss to his temple, utterly unaware that posterity would one day view it through the lens of profound sorrow. A sigh escaped her lips, heavy with the weight of that forgotten joy. The carefully constructed walls around her heart, erected brick by painful brick over months of silent suffering, now crumbled, leaving her exposed to the raw, visceral ache of what was, what had been. The email, the video, they weren't just a reminder of their past. They were an accusation, a silent question demanding to know how they had arrived at this desolate present from such a luminous beginning. She felt a sudden, desperate urge to understand, to unravel the tangled threads of their undoing. Was it a single, catastrophic event, or a slow, insidious erosion? And more importantly, was there anything left to salvage from the wreckage? The cursor on her screen blinked. a relentless rhythmic pulse against the stark white of the unread email. Below it, the video thumbnail, a frozen frame of their younger selves, laughing, sun-kissed, eternal, seemed to mock her present paralysis. She traced the outline of the image with a trembling finger, the cool glass of the screen a poor substitute for the warmth of his hand she remembered so vividly. The questions he had implicitly posed, the accusations she felt humming beneath the surface of his nostalgic monologue, resonated with an unbearable clarity. She had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize, to neatly tuck away the painful chapters of her life. But this video, this raw, unfiltered glimpse into their shared Eden, had ripped open every carefully sealed wound. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the exact moment their paradise had begun to fray. Was it the endless late nights at his office, the subtle shift in his touch, or the gradual erosion of their once unbreakable communication? Or perhaps it was something more insidious, a silent agreement to let the small resentments fester until they became insurmountable mountains. The truth was, she couldn't pinpoint a single moment, a definitive rupture. It had been a slow bleed, a quiet dying of 1,000 tiny cuts, each one seemingly insignificant until collectively they had drained all the life from their union. And now, this video, this desperate cry from the past, had forced her to confront the ghost of their love, not as a distant memory, but as a vibrant, breathing entity, still capable of inflicting profound pain. The digital clock on her laptop glowed a stark, unfeeling 2:17 a.m. Sleep felt like a forgotten language. Amelia pushed away from her desk, the worn leather of her chair groaning in protest. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet order, now felt oppressive, each shadow a lurking memory, each silent corner a repository of regret. She walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson, a vibrant tapestry of lives unfolding, oblivious to the quiet devastation within her own four walls. She thought of the Mark in the video, buoyant, almost boyish, his laughter echoing against the whitewashed walls of Santorini. He had spoken of futures, of children with her eyes, of growing old in a house by the sea. They had woven dreams with such effortless grace, each thread strong and vibrant. Where had that Mark gone? Where had that Amelia gone? The one who had believed so fiercely in their shared narrative, who had felt so utterly safe within the circle of his love. The woman in the video was a stranger to her now, a ghost of a self she barely recognized. A pang, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. It wasn't just the loss of him that grieved her, but the loss of them, the unique alchemy they had once possessed, the perfect fit of two souls. She traced the condensation on the window pane, a single solitary tear making its own path down her cheek. The tear reached the corner of her mouth, tasting of salt and old memories. She swiped it away with the back of her hand, a gesture of impatience with her own vulnerability. This was not helping. Dwelling on what was lost, on the ghost of their past selves, would only lead her further into the labyrinth of regret she had spent the last year trying to escape. Yet the video pulsed in her mind, a relentless loop of joy and promise, a stark counterpoint to the quiet desolation of her present. She stood from the window, the chill of the glass still clinging to her fingertips. The apartment felt vast and empty, each silence amplified by the absence of his familiar clutter, his resonant laugh, the soft murmur of his voice reading late into the night. It had been Mark who filled these rooms with life, with music and argument and the scent of strong coffee. Now it was just Amelia, surrounded by meticulously arranged furniture and the echoing spaces of a shared life that had splintered into two distinct sorrowful halves. Her gaze fell upon the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, their wedding day. They were smiling, caught in a moment of pure, unadulterated bliss, his arm a secure anchor around her waist. She remembered the weight of his hand, the warmth of his skin against hers, the certainty that had settled deep in her bones that day. How could something so solid, so undeniably real, have crumbled into dust? The question burned, a persistent ache behind her ribs. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all their unspoken words, Amelia walked towards her laptop, its screen still displaying the final, haunting image of the video player. There was an email from Mark, still unread, beneath the video link. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, a tremor running through her hand. What more could he possibly say? What explanation could bridge the chasm that had opened between them? Fear and a desperate, fragile curiosity warred within her. But the video, with its insistent whisper of what they once were, compelled her. She clicked. The new email from Mark was short, almost brutally so, devoid of the usual pleasantries he'd always insisted upon, even in their most strained exchanges. The subject line simply read, "Please, just listen." There was no body text, only an attachment, an audio file. Amelia's breath hitched. An audio file? Not another video, not a letter penned with careful, persuasive words, but just his voice. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The video had been a curated memory, a carefully constructed narrative of their past. An audio message felt far more immediate, more raw, less filtered. It was a direct line, bypassing the visual cues, forcing her to confront only the timbre of his voice, the nuances of his delivery, the unspoken emotions that might lie beneath his words. Her fingers still trembling slightly, moved to click the attachment. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the world was a blur of muted grays and greens, mirroring the unsettled landscape of her own heart. The late afternoon light cast long, melancholic shadows across the room, deepening the sense of introspection that had taken hold. She thought of the Santorini sun, bright and unforgiving, illuminating every flaw and every perfection, just as their love had once done. A deep, fortifying breath. She pressed play. The silence that preceded his voice was almost deafening, filled with the hum of her laptop and the frantic beating of her own heart. Then it came. His voice, familiar yet subtly altered by the distance and the passage of time, filled the quiet room. It was lower than she remembered, a little rough around the edges, as if worn smooth by unspoken burdens. There was a tremor in it, too, a vulnerability she hadn't heard in years. "Amelia," he began, and the single word, her name, spoken with such quiet intensity, was a physical blow. It was not the angry, frustrated tone of their last conversations, nor the detached politeness that had replaced it. It was something else entirely, something that resonated deep within her, stirring dormant feelings she had long tried to bury. "If you're listening to this, it means you watched the video." A cold wave of recognition washed over Amelia. He wasn't talking about the video she had just clicked on, the one titled, "This is the most important video of my life." He was referring to another video, one embedded within the email, a video she had almost overlooked in her haste and trepidation. Her eyes darted to the email client, confirming the tiny thumbnail she had dismissed as an attachment, now glaringly obvious. A knot tightened in her stomach. He had orchestrated this, a carefully constructed sequence designed to elicit what? She closed her eyes for a moment. The image of his face, younger, vibrant, from the Santorini clip, still vivid behind her eyelids. The contrast with the man whose voice now filled her room was stark. The tremor she had detected wasn't just vulnerability. It was a prelude to something profound, something he had deliberately withheld until this moment. She reopened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the screen, a sense of dread coiling in her gut, intertwined with a strange, undeniable curiosity. "That video," he continued, his voice gaining a fragile strength, was us, or who we were, who I thought we'd always be. A sigh, heavy with untold regret, filtered through the speakers. I needed you to see it again. Not to hurt you, not to make you feel guilty, just to remember what we built before we started tearing it all down, brick by painful brick. The raw honesty in his tone was disarming, stripping away layers of her own carefully constructed defenses. She felt a familiar ache begin to bloom in her chest, a phantom pain from a wound that had never truly healed. Because what I have to tell you now, Amelia, makes that video, makes all of it, even more impossible to forget. The air in the quiet room seemed to thicken, pressing in on Amelia, making each breath a conscious effort. Her fingers, still resting on the cool metal of her laptop, twitched, a nervous energy thrumming beneath her skin. What I have to tell you now, Amelia, makes that video, makes all of it, even more impossible to forget. The words echoed, precise and chilling, in the sudden silence that followed. She could almost feel the weight of his unspoken confession hanging in the digital space between them. A tangible presence. A flicker of the screen caught her eye. Mark's face reappeared, closer now, filling the frame. His eyes, usually so guarded, were wide. A haunted vulnerability etched around them. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. A gesture Amelia knew well, a tell for when he was truly grappling with something momentous. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his Adam's apple bobbing. Amelia, he began again, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sick. The words, so stark, so utterly devoid of embellishment, hit her with the force of a physical blow. The phantom pain in her chest intensified, no longer a dull ache, but a sharp, visceral twist. Her vision blurred for a moment, the room tilting precariously. Sick? The single word detonated in her mind, sending shrapnel of fear and disbelief in every direction. She wanted to scream, to demand clarification, to deny it outright, but her throat was constricted. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her vocal cords. Mark continued, his gaze unwavering, as if he could see her through the screen, witness her silent unraveling. It's aggressive. And it's not good, Amelia. Not good at all. He paused, his mouth forming a thin, grim line. They've given me a timeline. The last few words were almost lost, swallowed by the profound grief that seemed to emanate from him, seeping into the very fabric of the recording. The beautiful Santorini backdrop, the joyful memories, the tender dreams they had once shared, all of it was instantly overshadowed, cast into a terrifying, irreversible shadow. The video, once a poignant reminder of what they had lost, now felt like a cruel, exquisite torture, a vibrant tableau of life brutally contrasted against the encroaching darkness. The screen went dark, plunging Amelia's living room into a sudden, oppressive silence, broken only by the frantic thrumming of her own pulse. Her hand, still gripping the mouse, trembled uncontrollably. The image of Mark's face, etched in despair, lingered behind her eyelids, a ghost in the afterglow of the monitor's light. A timeline. The words echoed, hollow and final, in the cavern of her mind. A cold dread seeped into her bones, chilling her from the inside out. This wasn't merely a plea for reconciliation, a desperate attempt to mend what was broken between them. This was something far more profound, more terrifying. This was an elegy, a farewell whispered from the precipice of an abyss. The vibrant colors of Santorini, the laughter, the promises, they were not just memories now. They were a cruel juxtaposition to the stark, monochrome reality Mark had just laid bare. She stumbled backward, collapsing onto the worn velvet of her sofa, the laptop clattering softly to the floor. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. For months she had built walls, brick by painful brick, around her heart, protecting herself from the lingering ache of their separation, from the sharp edges of his perceived betrayal. Now, those walls crumbled, not under the force of a renewed argument or a passionate plea, but under the quiet, devastating weight of his impending absence. It was a different kind of wound, one that bypassed anger and resentment, striking directly at the core of a love she had tried, and failed, to extinguish. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, quickly followed by another and another, until her vision blurred, obscuring the familiar comfort of her own home. The silence of the apartment, usually a balm, now pressed in on her, amplifying the frantic rhythm of her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if hoping to erase the images, the emotions, the sudden overwhelming chasm that had opened beneath her. But the video played on loop in her mind. Mark's earnest eyes, the way his hand had instinctively found hers as they walked along the caldera, the shared secret smile they exchanged over a particularly bad Greek coffee. He hadn't just shown her a video. He had unearthed a time capsule, filled with the purest essence of who they once were, a testament to a love so profound it now felt like a fictional tale. Her fingers, still trembling, instinctively sought her phone, her thumb hovering over Mark's contact. What would she say? "I saw your video. It broke me." Or perhaps, "Why now? Why this?" The questions swirled, thick and suffocating, yet no coherent thought formed. No clear path emerged from the emotional debris. The betrayal she had nursed for so long, a bitter, protective shield, felt strangely hollow now. It was no longer about who was right or wrong, about the words exchanged in anger, or the distance that had grown between them like an invasive weed. It was about the loss, the profound, undeniable loss of a future they had so lovingly crafted together, now scattered like ashes on a forgotten breeze. She opened her eyes, the blur slowly receding to reveal the dim outlines of her living room, a space they had once filled with their shared life, now echoing with the ghosts of laughter and unspoken dreams. The phone in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a direct line to a truth she wasn't sure she could bear. Her breath hitched, catching in a throat suddenly constricted by unshed tears. The urge to call him, to demand answers, to simply hear his voice one last time, warred with a paralyzing fear. What if he sounded different? What if the illness had already begun to steal the vibrant timbre she remembered so vividly? The betrayal, once a sharp, cutting pain, now seemed a trivial wound compared to the gaping chasm of grief opening before her. She lowered the phone slowly, her gaze drifting to the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a relic from their Santorini honeymoon. In it, Mark's arm was slung casually around her waist, his head thrown back in genuine laughter, a laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes and always promised joy. Her own smile was wide, unburdened, reflecting the effortless happiness of a woman utterly cherished. The sun, a golden orb, painted them in hues of warmth and endless possibility. Now, that same sun felt like a cruel spotlight, illuminating the stark, brutal reality of his impending absence. The life they had built, brick by fragile brick, was crumbling, not from neglect or indifference, but from an external force, a merciless thief stealing their shared tomorrow. A single tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek, a stark contrast to the burning ache in her chest. The photograph seemed to shimmer, the memory of that day so vivid it almost hurt. Amelia reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing the cool glass that protected their frozen moment in time. She remembered the salty tang of the air, the distant chime of goat bells, the way Mark's voice had deepened when he whispered promises into her hair. Promises of forever, of adventures yet to come, of a love that would weather any storm. Now those promises felt like echoes in an empty hall. their substance dissolved by the relentless march of a disease she couldn't fight. A wave of nausea washed over her, a physical manifestation of the despair coiling in her gut. She stumbled towards the sofa, collapsing onto its plush cushions, the world tilting precariously around her. Her mind raced, a cacophony of questions with no answers. How long had he known? Why hadn't he told her sooner? Was this email, this video, this audio, his way of saying goodbye, a final desperate plea for understanding, for forgiveness? The betrayal, once a festering wound, now seemed a minor abrasion compared to the gaping, cavernous pain that threatened to consume her. It was as if the universe had decided to play a cruel trick, forcing her to relive the vibrant joy of their past, only to snatch away the future she hadn't even realized she still yearned for. The scent of stale coffee and unread books in her small apartment, usually a comfort, now felt oppressive, each familiar object a silent witness to her unraveling. She closed her eyes, but the images persisted. Mark, laughing, his hair ruffled by the Aegean breeze. Mark, proposing on that cliffside, his eyes alight with adoration. Mark, his voice raspy with illness, delivering the brutal truth. The juxtaposition was unbearable, a kaleidoscope of happiness and horror spinning wildly behind her eyelids. A cold dread seeped into her bones, a fear far deeper than the shock of his impending death. It was the fear of regret, of all the words left unsaid, the apologies withheld, the chances irrevocably lost. Their separation had been a slow, painful bleed, 1,000 tiny cuts rather than one decisive blow. Pride had been their executioner, a silent, unyielding force that had kept them apart even as their hearts still, she now realized, beat in a fractured rhythm. She had built walls around herself, brick by carefully laid brick, believing them to be fortifications against further hurt. Now, in the face of this catastrophic news, those walls felt like a prison, trapping her with her own bitter memories. The phone, forgotten in her clenched hand, vibrated against her palm, a jarring intrusion into the silent scream of her thoughts. It was Sarah, her best friend, calling to discuss a trivial work matter. Amelia stared at the caller ID, her finger hovering over the green icon, then slowly, deliberately, pressed the red one. She wouldn't speak to anyone right now. The world outside her apartment felt impossibly distant, a muted hum against the roaring tempest within her. She rose from the armchair, her movements stiff, as if her limbs were suddenly weighted with lead. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating, each familiar object a silent witness to her unraveling. Her gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a candid shot from their first anniversary, Mark's arms slung casually around her shoulders, both of them beaming, utterly oblivious to the future's cruel twists. He looked so vibrant, so full of life, a stark, painful contrast to the spectral voice that had just delivered his death sentence. A tremor ran through her, a deep, unsettling vibration that started in her chest and spread outwards, making her hands shake uncontrollably. She reached for the photo, her fingers tracing the outline of his smiling face, a ghost of a touch across the smooth glass. The sharp edge of the frame pressed into her skin, but she barely registered the discomfort. All she could feel was the monumental ache in her soul, the sudden terrifying realization that the future she had once so carefully constructed, both with and without him, had just been irrevocably shattered. The silence of the house, once a comfort, now amplified the frantic beating of her own heart. Amelia closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of Mark's face in the photograph, but it was already seared into her mind, a vibrant, laughing ghost. She remembered the arguments, the slow, insidious erosion of their connection, the bitter words exchanged like poisoned darts. Each memory was a fresh cut, now bleeding with the terrible knowledge that time was running out, not for reconciliation, but for existence itself. A sudden, overwhelming need to hear his voice again, not as a harbinger of doom, but as the man she had loved, seized her. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy, and navigated to the email, replaying the audio file. This time, she didn't just hear the words. She heard the slight tremor in his voice when he spoke of the timeline, the almost imperceptible catch in his breath as he described the aggressive nature of his illness. It wasn't just a clinical diagnosis. It was Mark, facing the unimaginable, alone. The thought of him enduring this without her, without anyone, twisted a knife in her gut. She had built walls around herself, brick by carefully placed brick, after their separation, believing she was protecting herself from further pain. Now those walls felt like a prison, trapping her with her regrets while he faced his final curtain call. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She still loved him. Buried beneath layers of resentment and hurt, the love was still there, raw and aching, and now impossibly amplified by the specter of loss. The sudden clarity of her feelings was terrifying. It wasn't a gentle reawakening, but a violent resurgence, a tsunami of emotion that threatened to drown her. Her breath hitched, a silent sob escaping her lips as she clutched the phone to her chest, as if it were a lifeline connecting her to him. The meticulously constructed facade of indifference she had maintained for months crumbled, revealing the raw, vulnerable core she had so desperately tried to hide. She thought of their last conversation, a clipped exchange about dividing their shared assets, devoid of warmth, devoid of anything resembling the history they'd shared. How could she have been so blind, so consumed by her own pain, that she failed to see his? Or perhaps he hadn't shown it then. Perhaps he had already begun to retreat, to build his own solitary fortress against the encroaching darkness. A fresh wave of guilt washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Every argument, every silent dinner, every slammed door replayed in her mind, each moment now imbued with a tragic irony. She had been so busy cataloging his faults, so focused on the ways he had hurt her, that she had completely missed the silent, devastating battle he was fighting. The vibrant, laughing Mark in the Santorini video, the one who had promised forever with such earnest conviction, was now a ghost, fading even as she watched him. The weight of this revelation pressed down on her, a physical ache in her chest that rivaled the memory of their separation. She found herself clutching the small silver locket she always wore, a remnant of their earliest days, its cool metal a stark contrast to the burning regret within her. The image of Mark, vibrant and alive, dancing under the Santorini sun, flickered behind her eyes, a cruel mirage. It wasn't just his impending absence that clawed at her now. It was the realization of how much she had already lost, how much time had been squandered in a bitter stalemate. The silence of her apartment, usually a comforting balm, now felt suffocating, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She pictured him, alone, facing this unimaginable burden, and a profound empathy, sharp and agonizing, pierced through the layers of her own hurt. What had he been thinking, sending that video, then the audio? Was it a plea for understanding, a final desperate attempt to reclaim what they had lost, even if only in memory? Or was it a cry for forgiveness, for the unspoken angers and resentments that had calcified between them? Amelia closed her eyes, the locket digging into her palm, and a single hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It was not just for Mark, or for the beautiful, doomed love they had shared, but for the stark, brutal truth of missed opportunities, of words left unsaid, and of a future that had irrevocably shattered. The tear was quickly followed by another, and then a torrent, each drop carrying the weight of years of unspoken sorrow. Her body began to tremble, a silent internal convulsion that mirrored the chaos in her mind. The locket, still clutched in her hand, felt impossibly heavy, a tangible anchor to a past that now seemed both impossibly distant and brutally present. She opened her eyes, blurring the familiar contours of her living room. The afternoon light, which had earlier seemed benign, now cast long, accusatory shadows. What was she supposed to do with this truth, this devastating confession delivered not in person, but through the cold, impersonal medium of a digital file? Her first instinct was to call him, to demand an explanation, to rage against the injustice of it all. But what explanation could there be for a terminal illness? What rage could undo the irreversible march of time? The anger that had festered for so long, the self-righteous indignation that had fueled their separation, now felt petty, insignificant in the face of such profound finality. It was a cruel irony that it took the specter of death to dissolve the walls they had so painstakingly constructed between them. She thought of their last argument, a trivial spat over forgotten groceries that had somehow spiraled into a bitter recounting of every perceived slight, every broken promise. It felt impossibly foolish now, a microscopic squabble against the vast canvas of existence. The phone in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a relic from a life now irrevocably fractured. Her thumb hovered over his contact, a name she hadn't dialed in months, a name that suddenly pulsed with an unbearable urgency. What would she say? "I'm sorry you're dying? I regret everything?" The words caught in her throat, thick with a grief that felt both ancient and shockingly new. This wasn't the kind of farewell she'd ever imagined. Not a slow, agonizing slide into a silence she hadn't chosen, but an abrupt, violent tear in the fabric of their shared history. She closed her eyes, and the vibrant images of Santorini flooded her mind again. Mark, laughing, his hair tousled by the Aegean breeze, pulling her into the turquoise water. Their hands intertwined as they watched the sunset paint the caldera in hues of fire and rose. The whispered promises under a canopy of stars. That Mark, the one from the video, was so full of life, so utterly incandescent. The contrast with the man in the audio, his voice tinged with a fragile resignation, was a chasm too wide to bridge. The playful intimacy of their honeymoon, once a cherished memory, now felt like a cruel taunt, a vibrant ghost haunting the ruins of their present. It was as if the universe had conspired to rewind their story to its brightest chapter, only to highlight the impending darkness. The ache in her chest intensified, a physical manifestation of the grief that had begun to bloom, sharp and unexpected, in the barren landscape of their separation. How could she mourn a future they had already discarded? Yet the truth was undeniable. She was mourning not just the memories, but the possibility of what those memories might have once again ignited. The illness, a silent predator, had stolen that possibility, leaving only the stark, undeniable reality of an ending. Amelia's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, the screen a dizzying blur of missed calls and unread messages. She scrolled past them, her focus narrowed to a single contact. Mark. Her thumb hovered over the call icon, a battle raging within her. What could she possibly say? "I'm sorry I let you go. I wish we had more time." The words felt hollow, inadequate against the enormity of his impending loss. Yet, not calling felt like a betrayal, a final, irreversible severing of the last fragile thread that bound them. She took a shaky breath, the weight of their complicated past pressing down on her, and pressed call. It rang once, twice, then a third time, each chime a hammer blow against her already fractured composure. And then, a click. The phone, a familiar weight in her trembling hand, felt impossibly heavy. Each digit she pressed was a tiny hammer blow against the fragile piece she had meticulously built over the years of their separation. The first ring echoed in the cavernous silence of her apartment, a sound both alien and intimately familiar. It was the same ringtone she had assigned to him a decade ago, a bright, optimistic chime that now seemed cruelly ironic. Then a click, a breath, and his voice, hoarse, tinged with an exhaustion that went beyond mere physical fatigue. Amelia? Her own name, spoken by him, was a key turning in a lock she thought had long rusted shut. A floodgate of emotions, held back by a dam constructed of pride and pain, burst forth. The carefully rehearsed words, the accusations, the explanations, all dissolved into a single, raw, choked sob. "Mark," she managed, the sound barely a whisper. A long pause stretched between them, thick with unshed tears and unspoken histories. She could almost feel his presence across the miles, the familiar scent of old books and autumn leaves that always clung to him. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer, laced with a tenderness that tore at her heart. "Amelia, I understand if you don't want to talk. I needed you to know." "No," she interrupted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "No, Mark, don't say that. I need to talk. I need to tell you." The words caught in her throat, tangled with regret. The weight of their shared past, the vibrant joy of Santorini, the slow, agonizing decay of their love, it all pressed down on her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the apology encompassing so much more than just the past few minutes, the past few months, the past few years. It was an apology for every misunderstanding, every harsh word, every missed opportunity to truly see and understand the man she had once promised to spend her life with. Another silence, but this one was different, softer, imbued with a fragile understanding. "Amelia," he said again, his voice barely audible. "I was so afraid you wouldn't call." And in that moment, as the last vestiges of her carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust, Amelia knew. She knew that despite everything, despite the bitterness and the distance, the love that had once burned so brightly between them had never truly extinguished. It had merely smoldered, waiting for a breath, a touch, a voice in the darkness to ignite it once more. "I'm here, Mark," she said, her voice steady now, resolute. "I'm here." And she held the phone to her ear, listening to the precious, fragile sound of his breathing, knowing that for whatever time they had left, they would face it together.